Today, we're joined by an amazing person. We are with Marty Scott, co founder of Liverpool Legends. So, I want to start off at the beginning here because Liverpool Legends isn't just another tribute show. It was actually put together by Louise Harrison, George's sister. So, how did that all come together?
Yes, so I met Louise. I was singing at a Beatle convention in Chicago. It was like a 3-day thing, and now I'm a pretty big Beatle fan my whole life. So I was singing some George tunes at this convention, and I didn't know, but Louise Harrison was there as like a guest of honor or something like that. George had just passed away like a couple months before, and I don't know. We hit it off. Like she saw me sing, and she thought we were supposed to be in each other's lives somehow. And she really kind of approached me through the guy who ran the fest, and we ended up hanging out together that whole weekend. It was weird. And a week later, she like brought me to meet Paul McCartney, and I'm sitting on a couch between both of them like for an hour, and that's kind of started everything. Like the time I met her, my life just sort of went into a whole Beatle land world, and it's been that way ever since. And after a couple of years of really being close, we spent a lot of time together, and she wanted to help put something together that was special, and she wanted to be a part of it. And there's a lot of Beatle groups in the world playing Beatle music, which is awesome, but she wanted to put something together that was really special and find four guys who really could portray it in the right way and be certain kind of people. And so we set out to do a bunch of auditions, kind of pretty much worldwide, and came up with four likely characters. And we were kind of on our way. Happened all pretty quick. We ended up our first part of Liverpool Legends. We opened a theater in Branson, Missouri, which I had never even really heard of at the time. And we got there and started playing 5 shows a week for years and years and years. And that's kind of where we got good, because we just did like thousands of shows there and learned how to put a show together the right way. But it all started with me just kind of meeting her at the Beatle convention, singing While My Guitar Gently Weeps.
I think it's even cooler that this entire thing started, especially for you, in this area. It isn't like, oh yeah, you know what? I met them halfway across the country. For it to be in Chicago, I feel like that just is so darn cool.
Yeah, I mean, I grew up in Chicago, so yeah. And at the time, she was living in Benton, or just outside of Benton, Illinois, which is where she moved in the early 60s. Like before the Beatles were famous, Louise and her husband moved to this Benton, Illinois, of all places, where he was like an engineer and there was coal mines there. And so in 1962, she moved to the US. And all of this time, she has had some land there still. And so she was still there, like when I met her, and which made it all, yeah. And I grew up like in Schaumburg. So that's how that whole thing started. I ended up, not too long after that, I bought a house that was next to her place in Benton for a little while. We were going to use, it was a really cool place, like on a lake, and we were going to use it as our cool getaway place and fix it up for the band. And we ended up getting so busy that we never had a chance to do anything with it. We ended up selling it, but anyway, it was cool. We're like, wow, we got a house right next door to George Harrison's sister. It's weird.
That is so cool.
Yeah.
All right,
I never told anybody that before. I don't know why it's never come up in an interview. But
that's awesome.
yeah.
What was Louise like as a person? So you're getting to work with somebody who is very closely in that Beatles inner circle. So what was she like as a person?
First of all, she had a huge heart. She'd give people the shirt off her back. She always wanted to do things for the world and try to do things for the world. Always kind of wanted to be her own person a little bit. And it was tough because what she was George Harrison's sister, which was a very unique position to be in, because none of the Beatles had any other sisters. She's the only one. I think John has a half sister or something, but Louise was like the only sister of any of the Beatles. And they were just such a massive thing, and they still are in the world, that even her life was completely affected by it. When they came to America in 64, her life was never the same either, because the next thing she's traveling around the country, and she had a radio show, she made a record, she's always been super busy, just and being defined as George's sister is kind of a weird thing. Like they just were such a massive impact on everything that everywhere yeah, I'd be with her. Louise and I spent like 20 years together or something. So I've seen and know her more than anybody. And, just random, we would be like in Walmart or something and look to the left and there's a t-shirt with her brother's picture on it and there's a mug and and we're just in line at Walmart. It's just it's a strange her life was, wherever she went and whatever she did, as soon as somebody found out she was George's sister, it was a different thing. Next, she's having dinner with people that want to talk to her, or she's whatever door that we're in front of gets opened for her. So it was kind of an interesting life she had. There's I feel like there needs to be a movie about it because when the Beatles were not famous yet, she was already here and she was trying to help them get known here, and they were known in England and they weren't known in the US at all, and they couldn't their manager, and they were on a bad label here, and their manager Brian Epstein started sending Louise records to try to get, can you, anything you could do to help get these guys going in the US. And she's a housewife in the early 60s going around with records trying to get her brother's music played and mostly getting rejected because it was a different time back then. Women weren't the ones going out into the record companies and doing stuff like that. Most of the time she would just get letters saying like, "Oh, thank you, Mrs." Her name was Caldwell at the time. She was married to a guy named Caldwell, and she has all these letters that were like, "Thank you, Mrs. Caldwell, for your interest in our station, and we don't really think this music is for us, but good luck with your brother's band," or just like cool, which is amazing to me. I sing stuff like that. You hear all about the successes of the Beatles, but you don't hear that kind of stuff too often. And she had a lot of it. So it was a pretty unique life for her to even be, in a sense, she was kind of like the very first promoter. She had this great story that she told, like so she's living in Benton and she went to the record store. The Beatles were pretty famous in England already. They had a record out, and I think For Me to You, they had I don't know. Anyway, they were starting to really get famous in England, and nobody ever heard of them here yet. This is probably a year before the Ed Sullivan Show. She went to the record stores in the town that she was in, and none of them had the Beatle records. And so she started writing to Brian Epstein, telling him that the records aren't here. And so she took a drive to St. Louis. I think it was like Swan Records, or well, I'm not the best on the Beatle history, but they were on a label that wasn't really a good label. And she went to the Swan Records, the office in St. Louis, and it was literally like closed and boarded up. Like, and that was supposed to be, that's the headquarters of their record label. And so so I've seen these cool letters exchanges between her and Brian, and she wrote to him saying like, "Hey, this is not right. The record company isn't even functioning." And and it's interesting because if you think of the time in 1962 or three, that was 63. That's a lot for she was basically a housewife raising kids, and that didn't really. It's a kind of a really cool story. And then the letters from Brian going back like, "Hey, thank you. We're taking everything you say very seriously." And it's like, we're actually moving labels. And then they got them on this other label, which was also a shitty label. So like, it's some cool exchanges back and forth. And she's got these, I've helped. The way I found a lot of these things, I was just helping her move. And I found like boxes of random crap, and literally like crap, like stuff. She is a pack rat. So she would have like a cardboard box full of junk. And then in it is like, I'd pull out like, "What's this?" So, "Oh, it's a letter from Brian Epstein," or, just really cool things that I didn't know existed. And it really kind of tells the story of what she was doing or trying to do back then. And like I said, mostly kind of getting rejected, which is really interesting because everybody knows about 6 months later, they kind of took over the world, you know? It's really kind of funny. Like like Del Shannon, who was a singer in the 60s, and he toured with the Beatles, and he recorded From Me to You in 63. And he had it wasn't really a hit, but it was on the charts here in the US before the Beatles were. And, it was like number 39 or so. It wasn't like a number one hit, but it was charting here and it was starting to get play. And so that was the record I think Louise was taking around going like, hey, you're playing Del Shannon. This is my brother's group, and here's the record. You should play this. And the one she's got one letter that's just like, oh, thank you very much, Miss Caldwell. We prefer Del Shannon's version, but good luck. Or, just like, so the interesting thing would be to those people at those radio stations when they saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show 6 months later or a year later or whatever. They must have been like, wow, that's that lady that came in and we should have listened to her or something. I don't know. She did a lot of things like that that really isn't even documented in most places. And I only, she used to tell me things, and I'd be like, I've read a lot of Beatle books. I've never read that. I never read you did that or whatever. So I always kind of like, oh yeah, she was a bit like my grandmother, and I just thought she was sort of at some point telling stories. And then I found all this stuff, boxes of letters from her mother that her mom was kind of pissed off that, like, because Brian was also, the Beatles manager was also sending her his other artists, like Jerry and the Pacemakers. And he's like, hey, I have this record too. If there's anything you could do to push that record. And and George's mom, their mom was pissed off about it. She was like, who does Brian want you to promote now? I don't trust him. And, crazy cool letters that I just, I was supposed to be moving her this day. And I spent the day just freaking out, looking at all this stuff in boxes that were in with, like I said, a bunch of shit, and like she wasn't even keeping them in any form or fashion. And I'm just like, man, these should be like in the Smithsonian. It's that cool,
Mhm.
And it also shows what she was actually doing before they had any promoter here at all. Back to like what she did, she didn't get, she got the record played on some local radio stations and stuff, but really most of the stuff was not successful. And then, then they broke on the Ed Sullivan Show, and then it was the whole world changed from that point.
Did she ever mention potentially becoming like a full time promoter? Was that ever something that went through her head of, hey, I'm already busting my butt here?
I saw a letter, like it was she wanted to, I think. But by the time that kind of happened, they didn't need it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
These letters were happening 6 months before Ed Sullivan, going back and forth. And literally, like I said, she was advising them. There was a magazine back then called Cashbox that she went and got. And it was sort of like Billboard charts. And so she was researching and trying to figure it out. It's pretty amazing. Like I said, it should be a movie because it's not really out there too much in the world. But I think part of the reason why she wanted to do something with me even was because she had that in her. Like she wanted to, with Liverpool Legends, she didn't really get too much involved in the show, but she did get involved in promoting it pretty well. Like she was a sort of like the voice piece of it, like she would, her and I did a millions of interviews. We'd go on every morning TV show and like she loved that stuff. And she I always said, like, she was a ham. So I always said, like, if she could figure out how to do the show without us, she probably would have. All of the years she would come out during intermission when she was traveling with us. Like she moved to Branson to be part of our show, which was really cool. So when we opened our theater in Branson, she was there every day, greeting the crowd and talking. Like she'd do the intermission and take question and answers and tell little stories of George and her life and stuff. And super cool. And so she loved, that was part of, I think, her favorite thing in life is she liked the attention most of the time, that it, because like I was saying, everywhere she went, somebody wanted to be around her because of who she was, which was, I've seen it a million times. It was crazy life she had. The biggest doors, like presidents or famous actors and athletes, and so many of them, when they found out who she was, would want to talk to her. And that was kind of her whole life.
So, how important was it to her the Liverpool Legends got the details exactly right? With this being such a big deal, with this being her brother's band, how important was it for all the details to be just perfect?
No, I don't think anybody's perfect. We brought a little bit of something different to it all because we actually were friends and we had a lot of fun, which kind of is naturally like the Beatles. If you've ever seen the Beatles play live, they're just cracking up most of the time and having a ball. So we got that stuff right away. The stuff of trying to perfect. I mean, we're still trying to perfect it. It's 20 years later. We're still, man, I don't know. Nobody's as good as the Beatles. So we watch a lot of films and everything we can get our hands on, and watch other people doing it too, and see what they pick up that we might have missed. And it's just kind of like a constant study of trying to, but we do try to really hard to get it right. The music and the everything we could do to get just a little closer to what they did or what they looked like or what they sounded like or what they talked like or walked like or chewed gum like or whatever. What kind of strings they used and what kind of knobs they had on their guitars and all the little things. It's what we do full time, so we might as well try to do it as best we can. So, but that's a process that we're still at it daily. Today I'll be thinking about something about it.
So, the show walks fans through the entire Beatles journey. So, what can audiences expect from start to finish?
Well, it's kind of cool. For one, the show's narrated by Louise, so that's a whole little personal touch that is very different than any other show. So yeah, and it kind of goes through a history of the Beatles. We start like at Ed Sullivan because that's kind of when most people saw them first. But then we go backwards to like the Cavern Club. We do this segment where the Cavern Club was when they were sort of first started out, and they were kind of a cover band, but it was a pretty important part of their journey. So we include that in the show. And it's cool because we're playing like Chuck Berry and Little Richard and all the things that they cut their teeth on. And then we move to like we do a bit from Shea Stadium because that was all the moments in their career that we think are a must. Like Shea Stadium was kind of like the first stadium concert for any rock and roll band. So pretty important. So we do a bit from that, and then we go into the psychedelic era, Pepper and Magical Mystery Tour and all that stuff. And kind of then we just kind of go year by year, album by album, and sort of morph into, the records were interesting because each one was a little more advanced than the one before. It's pretty unique in music. Like most artists are like, if you have a great song and maybe never have another one, but if they do, it's kind of like not too far from that one, and that record's not too far from that one. They were changing every album, and so was the world. It's just a weird, like a time in history where their run was from 64 to 70, and in all that time, there's that whole catalog of music and changes in the world. A lot of things happen from 64 to 70 in the world. So our show kind of follows that whole path of change that was happening with those guys, and try to give it a little bit of history of the Beatles. Then at the same time, it's basically just a rock show. We're playing everything live, and we're basically just a band surrounded by some cool production and stuff. And it's basically what our show is.
So, you've been Grammy nominated. What was that experience like for you in the band?
It was awesome. It was like the funny story on that is that when I heard about that project, I didn't even think it was worth doing. We were busy doing shows, and Louise was asked to narrate this album. It's mostly a Beatle fans talking about what the Beatles meant in their life, and it was cool. There was some famous people on it or whatever, like I said, like athletes and actors, and talking about the Beatles, and they wanted Beatles songs to cut between all these interviews, and for them to use the actual recordings was going to be super expensive. And so they were like, well, they knew Louise had us. And they're like, well, why don't we have the guys record all these tunes? And we were playing, I think, 6 shows a week at the time. And we were just busy. And that's hard it was a lot. And And then she kind of said yes for us without even asking me. And I was just like, I was kind of like, you wanted to do what? Record? That sounds really dumb, recording a bunch. I just didn't, it was funny because I didn't really even want to do it, but I ended up recording a bunch of basically really just kind of the songs that we were doing in the show because I didn't think much. I didn't want to get too deep into it. I had a little home studio in my house where I was living in Branson at the time because that's where our show was running. Recorded the show, basically most of the songs we did in the show in my little home studio, and just I sent it off to the record company and just didn't think, I did recorded it and produced it as best I could for a home studio. And I just kind of wanted to get it over with so we can get back to doing shows. And I don't know, about 6 months later, I get a call from the record company people saying, like, hey, what are you guys doing March 3rd or whatever? We got nominated for a Grammy. Can you come out? So that was just a huge shock. And I learned a lot about life through that because that ended up being like we're on the red carpet doing interviews, and it was really cool. It was like so it was a spoken word category because it was a narrated disc, which is not normally a big category at the Grammys. But that year it was up against Tina Fey, Val Kilmer, and Betty White or whatever. So it was super cool. And Betty White won, which is fine. Uh, but it was, we got to do the Grammy thing. We got to go to after parties, and Paul was there that year. So just randomly he was performing that year. And so we got to visit with him again. So it was like it was one of the coolest days of my life, really. And the funny thing is, like I said, I didn't really want to do it. I almost said no to it, just because we were busy playing shows in Branson.
I mean, if you have to lose to someone, Betty White is a pretty good person to lose to,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. She probably deserved it. She deserved it. But yeah, that was really something. It was a very surreal thing to even think back on it because we were hanging out with everybody. There's a lot of things that we've done that are super cool. Like we got to record at Abbey Road Studios. We got to play Carnegie Hall. We've done some things that are like make the list of my list of wow, I got to do that and it's feel really lucky. But the Grammy thing was pretty top at that. The real thing is that it was so unexpected and so out of the blue that I was like kind of in shock the whole time. But it's been a nice little boost for something that we have that we did. You could look up like me and Louise on the red carpet, and there we are talking to the lady who's still interviewing at the Grammys or whatever.
That's so cool. So you've played a lot of iconic venues like Carnegie Hall, Rose Bowl. Is there one moment that you really feel like stood out to you as a, hey, wow, this is an awesome, real experience. I can't believe we've made it this far?
In Mexico City, we've been doing really well for a lot of years. Like we play the nicest venue in all of Mexico. It's called Auditorio Nacional, and it's a very prestigious world renowned venue. It's like Carnegie Hall basically in Mexico City, but bigger. It holds like 10,000. We've been going to Mexico City now for over 10 years every year, and we're selling like this place out twice, like 2 nights in a row. So it's a 10,000 seater. So we're selling 20,000 seats, and it is like no other thing. It's like you growing up my whole life. I used to wonder, like, I'd go see big show. I'd go see like Paul or whoever, and I'd go like, and always wonder what that's like to get to play in front of that many people that are there to see you. So that's been a really cool thing. You get a tiny little taste of that, like wow, these people are literally paying to see us here in Mexico City, 20,000 of them. And it's not like you think it would be hard, but it's easy. It's the more people, the easier the show is. Usually it's opposite of what I've learned that. But like it's easier to play for 10,000 than 10. Like I get really nervous playing for 10 people in my living room, but for some reason when it's 10,000, you kind of just on automatic. That's been really something. That was another kind of thing that just happened. Like we got so big in Mexico because it's kind of a long story, but the first year we got offered to come to Mexico. And once again, we were in Branson being busy being Beatles in Branson at the time. And got an offer to go to Mexico, and I'm like, sure, yeah, we'd love to go to Mexico. And I didn't think much of it. We just signed on the contract to come like in May in Mexico City. And I wear a lot of hats in the group. I do all the bookings, I manage the group, I do everything. And I was just too busy to even think about Mexico. We were and it came time to be like about a month out. And I was like, oh, the Mexico show's coming up. I hadn't even looked at what the venue was or anything like that. And so I look up the venue, see where we're going to be playing, and like it's like this arena called at that time we played at this place called Arena Ciudad, and I looked it up, and like the Who was playing there that week or something, and I was like, well, this can't be right, because at the time we're playing, our theater in Branson held like 900 people, and if we were lucky we'd have 500 there a show, but we did do some bigger venues, but not. This was 18,000 seats, you know, and so I was like, I thought, well, a lot of times some of the bigger venues have little other venue rooms that are, or they curtain them off, or they make them smaller venues or something. And anyway, I remember reaching out to the promoter, and he's like, I I'm like, hey, how's the show doing? I was looking at that venue, and he was like, oh yeah, it's doing great. It's gonna sell out. We're at about like 16,000 now, and we've got a couple more thousand to sell. So it's just a weird. It turned out the guy like owns all the radio stations in Mexico, sort of, and he's just a really powerful promoter, and he's built our name there now. 10 years into like, we're outselling all the national acts in Mexico, just from what we're doing there all these years. So that's been a pretty, as far as an accomplishment goes, because there's no shows really like that for us. We're playing with now like the top orchestra in Mexico. They're backing us. They're called Orquesta Sinfónica Minería, who are kind of famous in their own right, in Mexico. And so we're doing these big shows, and it's a really something. And then the funny part is though, then we always come back, and the next show that we do is always this the next show after Mexico always is like some mess, like we're playing the Iowa Dental Association or something like that. And nobody's paying attention, and everybody's just eating dinner, and we're just like going like, man, last night I was a rock star, and today back to life, you know. But those shows we're going back in May this year to do two nights again, and that was at the arena. But then we moved to Auditorio Nacional, which is like this. If you look up like top venues on the planet, it's usually like in the top 3 or 4 or whatever. So we're doing two nights there this year, Memorial Day weekend. So yeah, that's been a accomplishment. And Carnegie Hall was a pretty big one for us too. That's where like my grandfather finally took notice and was like, "Oh, hey, you guys are doing okay, huh? Okay." You know.
That is so cool. So for a lot of people, the Beatles were the soundtrack of their lives. So what's it like seeing that emotional connection when you look at the crowd?
That's the fun part. I mean, it's really interesting because we have this whole cross section of people. One of the most, maybe the most unique thing about the Beatles is they always sort of stay current with whatever age group. Like it's still cool in college, the Beatles, and there's kids in high school that love the Beatles, and there's 8-year-olds that love the Beatles, and then all the way up to, you know, 90-year-olds or whatever. So our shows are really, it's an interesting cross section of people of ages, because that doesn't really happen in too many places that I've ever seen. Like where you have an 8-year-old and an 80-year-old, and they're singing every word and going crazy, and with their eyes wide open. And that's the weird, unique thing about the Beatles that can't even explain it, but it just is. And so it makes our shows really cool because you can look out in the audience and you see every age of life and you can also see maybe the change in somebody when they first come in the theater till when they leave, which is always a great, because a lot of people don't know what to expect. They might have seen the Beatles on TV, or they may have even seen another Beatles show, but ours is kind of different. And it's interesting to me to try to see how people transform from when they sit down to when they leave and after the show. And probably my favorite thing because I'm just, I've been doing this a long time. Most of the time on stage, I'm not thinking about the song. If I do that, I'll mess it up. But I'm thinking about I'm just kind of scanning and looking at different interesting people in the audience and watching their reactions and how they're, from the first song in to like the fifth song in, how much they started out, the curtain opens, oh, it's a little more rocked out than they think. And then like by the third song, they're kind of freaked out. And by the fifth song, they're like participating in the whole thing. And then by the end, they're like super changed sometimes, which is that's probably my favorite thing.
After years of performing in Branson, what's it like taking the show back on the road?
It's pretty fun. We like to travel, and I like to travel, and the band is really good right now, in that we all get along, and that's a hard thing. We travel with a crew and a band, and we all kind of like to travel and hang out together, so that part works. But it's also one of those things like when we're on the road for a long time, I'm like, man, I wish we were just in Branson so I could be in bed by 11 o'clock, because in Branson, I lived like 5 minutes away from the theater and we didn't have to, set up or take down or any of that stuff. That was a nice thing. So it's kind of like grass is always greener. When we're on the road for a bunch, I miss Branson. And when we're in Branson, I'm like, I got to get the hell out of here. So it's these days, like last year, we were only in Branson for a month, which was nice. It kind of keeps a presence here. We have a lot of fans here and stuff, so it keeps. And I live here. I'm in Branson right now, so it's nice to come back for a month. And I mean, for many years, we were doing like 10 months a year here, 5, 6 shows a week for 10 months. But that's also where we got good, because when we came here, we were just a band, and we learned being so many shows here with our own venue. We learned how to really put a show together, and I always say it's like music is kind of like shooting baskets or something. If like you stand at a free throw line and shoot and shoot and shoot, you're gonna you're gonna get pretty good at it after a while. And that's kind of what happened with us in Branson. But it doesn't mean you're gonna be Michael Jordan or anything. But it definitely the repetition of being in Branson really helped us because we it was just thousands of shows.
So put on your Louise hat for me. If someone's on the fence about coming out, what would you say to them?
I just say you're gonna have a great time, and you're gonna. I don't know. In all my years of doing this show, I've I've just man, when the show's over, a lot of people are walking out and they're either like, man, I felt like I was 16 again, if they're older, or they're like, I can't believe what I just saw. So many things. But our show is really interactive. It's a lot of fun. You could literally sing every word from the opening note of the show to the end, usually. And usually the whole crowd it's one of those things. If I ever forget the words to songs, I can just look out in the audience and read people's lips because everybody, it's such a music that everybody knows and loves. Which in that also makes it hard because we have to perform it right, and you miss one little thing, and everybody knows because the music's in everybody's DNA. But I will say, it's a really fun show. I enjoy being a part of it. All the performers in the group, we're fans of it, but we try to. That shows, we all like a fun kind of spread. So it's just a good time. I don't think anybody's ever saw our show and like wanted their money back or anything. Just print that. If you want your money back after seeing our show, you got it. All right. No, the show it's a blast, and we have a lot of fun doing it too.
Do you have a favorite song to perform?
I don't really. I mean, so because I play George in the show, George's big songs from the Beatles were like "Here Comes the Sun," something while my guitar gently weeps. So I like that was all in the later era of the Beatles because George was younger than John and Paul, and it took him a while to kind of catch up as a songwriter. So by the end, like by Abbey Road, the Beatles' last record, George had the best songs. So for me, I like that era better because it features me more. But I'm a fan of all of it. I love Ringo just as much, and if I put on an album. It's not like I'm only a George fan. I like them all. So I don't really have favorites, but just personally for me in the show, I get to be featured a little more toward the end because it kind of goes true into what the Beatles were, you know.
Last one. What do you hope people feel when they leave your show?
Oh, I mean, like I said, my favorite is when they've transformed a bit, you know, like where they feel different from when they walked in. You know, maybe when they walked in, they were got off work, whatever, you know, living that life. And then when the show's over, we took them out of that and made them happy, you know. And that's kind of the best thing. Just, I guess, just kind of want to make people happy. You want to give them, you know, try to give them an experience that kind of blows their minds a little bit and brings back some memories or gives them a chance to see something that they've never would have had a chance to see. You know, you can't go see the Beatles anymore. You can't, I mean, you can see Paul, but that isn't really the same. And you can see Ringo, and that ain't the same. And you can't see John and George at all. So trying to give a little bit of an illusion that somebody could change people's lives a little bit, you know, would be the highest end of what we do. You know, always the goal.
All right. So can you remind us what are the details of the show in DeKalb?
April 10th, yeah. And I think I want to say this is 5 years in a row at the Egyptian. The Egyptian has literally become, since I grew up in Chicagoland, we don't, if weirdly enough, we don't play too much in that area at all. So the Egyptian has literally become kind of our home base. So for me, it's great when I play there. My mom comes, my uncles, and family and friends, and it's kind of like a homecoming show for us, which I'm really looking forward to again. But yeah, I think this is 5 years in a row. Yeah, so it's been a really cool stop. It mostly for me, you know, the band is from all over the place. You know, I've got like one guy in Vegas and one guy in Atlanta and someone from Canada. So, but to me, the Cal, heck, one of my very first shows ever in music was in DeKalb when, you know, before I was a Beatle, playing at some place called the Jungle or something. I don't know. I grew up, you know, that was DeKalb's a cool college town, and there was always good venues to play there. We used to play like, I don't remember, McCabe's or something, or I don't know, going back a long time ago. But DeKalb's always been a great town, so it's a bit like coming home for me.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk with us today, Marty. This is awesome.